implementing with popular services. In this section, we're going to talk about integrating with services like Google, PayPal, Twitter, and Facebook. One note about this is that a lot of public integrations will not allow local connections, meaning that you can't just run these files off your computer, you need to run them off of a server. Now you can install Apache or other servers directly on your computer and run them from a localhost server, but if you're just loading the HTML file in your browser, some functionality may not work, and in chances, many of the functionality or none of the functionality will work. So just keep in mind, if you see something in a demo that isn't working, it's probably because you don't have the APIs set up correctly, or you need to run it directly from a server. But we're going to talk about how to set up your API keys. We're going to talk about the things you can do with the Google API and all of that stuff. And ultimately, there's so much amazing software out there, and there's so much really great services that can be leveraged. And I think these are 4 of the really useful ones to highlight, and there's a lot of really great information to come out of this. Integration with Google APIs. In this video, we're going to integrate with some of the APIs that Google offers, mainly Google Maps and Google Books, because that is the 2 different flavors of APIs. One has a JavaScript library that allows you to create JavaScript elements and do a lot with that, and the other one is a RESTful API where you're calling it with data and getting data back, but there's not a specific JavaScript library you're calling. The first thing we're going to need to do is set up our API keys, and an API key is your way to access an API and show that it's from you and get some analytics on what you're doing. When it comes to getting an API key, I just did a Google search for Google Maps API key web. And then I used the get API key. I followed the instructions and then clicked get started. It's going to ask me if I want to use maps, routes, or places. I just wanted to stick with maps, and I press continue. JS tutorial, and I seem to need to enable billing for this account, so I'm going to go do that and then cut back in. Everything is created, and I've been told I have 7 Google Maps app platform API use. I now have my API key, so I'll copy and paste this back in the code. I also have a 12-month free trial and $300 worth of free total credit to use as a dry run. To use the rest of the Google APIs, you'll need to enable the APIs specifically to your API key. Since we already got an API key with the maps, you don't have to get a new one. So here I searched for Google API key, and then went to setting up your API key. Now you have 2 choices here. You can use OAuth. It's a backend authentication that allows you to log in as a user and get a special key that allows you to then use your application to access that user's information, that data, and that user's Google apps. So you could use that to log into your calendar and manage your calendar and things like that. But you can't use that as a front end because it would be a big security issue, so everything has to be done on the back end, and that's how that authentication works. So from our API console, there is an enable APIs. And from here, we're going to scroll down and we're going to look at all the services. But ultimately, the only thing we're going to enable is Google Books. I'm going to search for Google Books and enable that API. Any of the other APIs are available, and all you have to do is enable them, but I'm not going to do that for this demo. So let's get into the actual integration. So here we have the page, and on it is a beautiful Google Maps. I have 4 points that have been pinned to here, and there's a lot of other things we can do. And this is a standard Google map. I can zoom in, I can zoom out, I can go to people view, I can go to satellite view. I then have a books section, and I have a search. And if I click search, it's going to search and it's going to find the first 10 results and output the title, the author, and the description. So if we look at the code, there's really 3 files. We have the index.html, we have our style CSS, which is fairly basic and we're not going to spend much time in, and we've got our script.js. So our index is only including the jQuery 3 library. It's including the Google Maps API. Now, Google Maps does use a JavaScript library, so that's what we're including here. And to include that library, we're required to add our API key. Now, this is my personal API key, and I will be disabling it once this video goes live. So what you should be doing is, if you run this example, you're probably going to get an error, and you'd need to replace this key with your key. So then we have script.js is being included. We have our section with the H1 saying Google APIs. We have our Google Maps, and we have a single div with the ID map for our map. We have an H2 for our books. We have our search. And then we've got a div with the ID book results for our book results. So let's go to the actual scripts. So I have the Google API key as a variable, and that just allows it easier to change. So you do need to change it in two places. You need to change it here, and you'll need to change it in the script include itself. Now you could use jQuery to dynamically include this script with the API key, but I didn't do that. So you have a function here, a init map. Now this is run automatically by the Google Maps implementation. And what this does is this will first create our map. So map is new Google Maps map. So map is the function under the google.maps project. Document get element by ID map. So it's going to call our div with the ID of map and then create that. We have the center and the zoom. Our center is an object with two values. The keys are latitude and longitude, LAT and LNG, and the values are 2.8 and -187, somewhere in the middle of the world. We also have the option of a zoom, and zoom is 1.5. I found that 2 was a little bit too zoomed in and 1 was way too far. Then I have 4 markers that I wanted to create, and in this case, I created the 4 variables, and these I gave names to, although really I could have just taken these values and put them in here. But I think this describes better what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. And then below that, you create the 4 markers. So it's really the same code. And you need a variable to be returned because you can do things with this later, but that's just how Google Maps works. So if you did take all of this out and just had google.maps.marker and then created a new marker, it wouldn't work. You need to create it in this fashion. So that's what creates our 4 tokens. And if we switch over to the Google Maps API documentation, so the Maps JavaScript API, we can see that there is a whole bunch of tutorials here that tells you how to create lots of pins, tells you how to create heat maps. So in this case, I think this is earthquakes. You can use pre-existing data sets that are out there, especially if they're in JSON, and have them create really interesting maps. But this is really great. Imagine you have a business and you want to show people where your business is. You can have a map, and then you can have it easily say, hey, give us your location, and we'll immediately give you directions. Or you can have people pin where they are, or if you have multiple locations and you're a large chain, you can have all your chains pinned. So here, this will tell you how to do all of those different things, but the examples I've provided are a really easy kind of copy and paste way for you to do that and get started doing that. And the second API I wanted to show you was the Google Books. And the reason I want to show this is it shows the second aspect of APIs. So in this case, we have a JavaScript object. We have a whole JavaScript library for handling maps, creating things, and doing all this. With this second set of libraries, all we have is a URL. We have a URL that allows us to do certain actions. So in this case, it's googleapis.com, and this is the books. And this is going to let us search. So we have here our search functionality, or at least the basic button. So we have our search button, .click, which is going to run a function, and it's going to check and make sure search text.val is not empty. And if it's not empty, call the function book search text.val. So if we go through here, that is an AJAX call, calling this URL with the title parameter, and then a few other parameters, and our Google API key. Then it's going to take that response, run through it, and run through the first 10 items, and it's going to do that by checking if item is greater than or equal to 9, break, which means stop the for loop, and then it's going to output the book results. So now let's take a look at what the output of this is. So here, I'm going to inspect, and that way I can see what's going on. So when I search Harry Potter, if I take a look at network, I search, so I have here, I can see under the response, here is the response. So it's a kind books volume, 1,869 items returned from the search. And here's each one of the items. So this item is item ID 0. Tells me it's a book. Tells me the book ID, the e-tag, the self-link, and then the volume information. So the title, the author's, publisher, description, etc. Sales information, the access information, search text, and then it goes on to the next one. So this is how I can see the output. And that's how I generate the results as I'm filtering through that. But if I go to the API documentation, I can see all of the different functions I can run. So I can do bookshelves get, list, I can add to book, I can add to bookshelf, I can update books, and all of this allows you to actually manage your own book list. I just did the one about searching, which is here volumes.list. So if I go to volumes.list, it tells me all the different parameters. So I can have a queue, which is my query, my full text query string. I have a download, a filter, a language restriction, library restriction, max allowed maturity rating, and I have all of these things, and then I can even execute without an OAuth, and I can do a basic search. So if you want to do advanced things, such as managing your own library, you're going to need OAuth. But if you want to do things that are more public information, like searching libraries or things like that, that can be done with just a standard API like we have today.